Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Balerion Space Ventures podcast. Today we are joined by Ben Bloom, founder and CEO of Atom Computing. Atom Computing is building large-scale quantum computers using neutral atom architectures and are in partnership with major technology companies like Microsoft to build scalable quantum infrastructures. Very excited to hear about this topic, Ben. I think quantum computing is maybe the deepest of deep tech, and appreciate you joining us today.
Oh, thank you. It's very nice to meet you.
So it's nice to meet you too. Could we start by just hearing about your background and how you came to be involved in quantum computing and start this company?
Yeah, of course. So I got my first taste of quantum mechanics or quantum computing actually as an undergraduate at MIT. I worked on something akin to like a quantum memory when I was an undergraduate there. And then afterwards, I went, moved a little bit away from quantum computing or quantum information and actually moved to atomic clocks. So I did my PhD at CU
Oh, cool.
Boulder at this half NIST, half CU institute called GILA, and working for this professor named Jun Yi. And together with all the folks in his lab, we built one of the most precise and accurate atomic clocks that's ever existed. Um, Now long since superseded by other clocks that that same professor has built long after I left. But it was a kind of cool idea of how do you use neutral atoms as a tool to go build a piece of equipment like an atomic clock. After that, I first went to go work on classical computing. I went to Intel and built lots and lots of really tiny rectangles. And then after doing that for a while, I decided I want to get into quantum computing. And so I actually joined Rigetti. So I was one
Huh.
of the first few employees at Rigetti, probably within the first 20. And I got a chance to learn a lot about quantum computing there, but also learn about the pros and cons of trying to do it with superconducting qubits. And at the same time, the work I had been doing with neutral atoms before and other groups pushing on neutral atoms really started to open the door to actually building a neutral atom quantum computer. I got super, super excited about that. And when I went to go look around for where can I go work on this, there just was nowhere. And so I decided to create a place to go work on it, and I founded Atom Computing.
Oh, very cool. Okay. And a lot of people are going to be hearing and thinking about quantum computing for the first time. I think we're kind of early in the wave where it's becoming a mainstream topic for investors to think about and just even the commercial market. So could you give us a primer on quantum? What is it and why is it important?
Yeah, I mean, quantum computing is a form of computing that's fundamentally different than classical computing. And the reason why it's fundamentally different is having to do with complexity classes of different kinds of algorithms it can assist with. And I think there's still, proofs being done about, what are the exact, circle of algorithms quantum computing can attack. But generally, what I will say is by using things called qubits, which are like bits, but are the quantum version of it so that you can put your bit or qubit in any superposition of 0 and 1, and you can have this phase between that 0 and 1. You're able to access problems that seem really, really difficult for classical computers. So things
Because the
like
classical computer doesn't have that phase. It's either totally zero or one.
exactly. It's that
Okay.
phase that's actually really important because you could try and build a classical computer that's, an analog computer, and you still don't get all these properties. So you really need to have that phase, and you really need to have a few more properties, like the anti-commutation of certain operators and stuff. But generally, what you get is something that can store a huge amount of information, in a very small number of qubits and something that allows you to do operations on that information, which are very, very different than the operations you can do on a normal classical computer. And what it turns out is when you do these things, a few problems start to become, I don't want to say really simple, but start to become simple to the extent where classical computers could absolutely never accomplish them. And so the, prototypical examples that people talk about are understanding how nature works. It turns out if you want to understand quantum mechanics, a great thing to go and do that calculation and really give you information about quantum mechanics turns out to be qubits because they are governed by quantum mechanics. So materials science, chemistry, all of these kind of natural world problems can actually really neatly be solved by quantum computers. And there's also some kind of surprising things that can be solved by quantum computers, like decrypting large numbers. And so finding the prime factors of large numbers. And so this is Shor's algorithm, which is, got a lot of hype and press around it, but it's also quite true that quantum computers, I think, are on the verge in the next few years of really unleashing this Q day or whatever, when you can go and actually decrypt secrets because you can actually go and factor these public keys and private keys. And so it's a big topic of interest for governments and also for businesses alike.
I've heard examples where they'll give a certain problem and say it would take, a classical computer 10,000 years and it would take a day, 1 to 3 days for quantum. Is that the order of magnitude that we're talking about roughly?
At least. I mean, it's not true for every
Least.
problem, but for some problems, it can be the difference between like hundreds of thousands to millions of years to days or hours on a quantum computer. And so it's really the difference between having something that we thought of as absolutely 100% safe to something that might be really expensive to go and crack, but I mean, there will be people who will pay for that. And so I
Yeah.
think this is an interesting kind of shift in what we need to do to protect our information and so on.
Okay. And when you talked about also the computer kind of understanding basic things, like does that apply to like basic science? Is this going to, lead to breakthroughs in just fundamental physics and things like that? Or
Um, I don't know if it's going to lead to breakthroughs in fundamental physics. I think it's going to lead to breakthroughs in using what we know about physics to engineer things. And I say that because, we're going to use this as a tool, just like you use a classical computer as a tool. And maybe that can help you make breakthroughs in fundamental physics. But a classical computer can also help you with classical engineering. It can, help you build CAD software. And you can then, build buildings because you can build, hundreds or thousands of different variations of them on a computer, and then you can have the design exactly the way you want it. Quantum computers are going to be exactly the same way. You're going to have software running on top of them, which allows you to then kind of create designer materials, understand the properties of materials as we know them now. Same thing with chemistry, and use that information to help you go and build new materials, build new drugs, build new chemical catalysts. All of these things are going to be possible because you have a new tool at your disposal.
okay, okay, I think I understand that better. So let me confirm the one of the things people talk about when building new real things now is the old way of trying to build the perfect thing over 10 years very expensively turned out to maybe not be the best way, and you wanted to do rapid iteration. You just build and break as fast as possible and learn. Is this maybe helping to accelerate that?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think this is the idea of, I mean, whenever you have to go into a lab or a fab to go and build something, that takes time, effort, and money, and a huge amount of time, effort, and money. And so if you can shift a lot of that, work into simulation, you will save huge amounts of money in the development of a new material, in the development of a new drug. And I think that's where quantum computers are going to really shine. Obviously, governments are interested in these decryption things, but I think that when you talk about commercial use cases, it's all about creating this tool which will shift money away from having to go into a lab or a fab and shift it towards let's try 10,000 different compounds or 10,000 different synthesis mechanisms before we actually go and actually set one up in a fab.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, so we've already heard about like with AI in certain settings where, maybe people in a law firm, the ones who really understand how to leverage AI, just become way more efficient and competitive in terms of their function. And
Yeah.
like this might function that way within engineering.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is just going to be, I mean, 10 years after quantum computers have debuted, it will just be another tool that people are using. And I think people will say, wow, this is like, how did we ever get done anything before this? Because now we can sit there and, like I said, try out variation after variation by just sending commands to a computer rather than having to go into the lab and try a billion different things.
Yeah, that's cool. And what is it that we keep hearing about? We hear about semiconductors, Moore's law, and then quantum next. And what's that relationship? What does that mean?
I think there's a few things. I mean, obviously, Moore's law has slowed down a lot. There have been huge advances in EUV and high NA UV and all these other things. And I think you'll hear more and more about different kinds of techniques to try to create smaller and smaller classical transistors. Uh, but it's no question Moore's law has slowed down a lot. And so when we think about, the future of computing, I think people think a lot about what has actually changed that has allowed computers to do more and more amazing things in the last few years? And it's not, huge advances in semiconductor technology. It's huge advances in how you take that technology and use it and create specialized compute like GPUs. And I think this is going to come up to be the same thing in quantum, which is there will be advances that allow us to build quantum computers, but these highly specialized processors we're going to call quantum computers are going to just be part of the computing framework. And I think they'll work hand in hand with AI. I think that for a long time, quantum computers are going to be expensive, and you're going to have to figure out what do I run on a quantum computer, what do I not run on a quantum computer because it costs a lot of money. And I think
Mhm.
the end arbiter of who is deciding that is probably going to be AI. Like you are going
Okay.
to say, to some algorithm, look, I'm looking for this catalyst. Let's figure out how to split this problem into work that gets done on CPUs, work that gets done on GPUs, and then work that gets done on QPUs. And I think this is going to be the future where you actually figure out this kind of heterogeneous compute infrastructure is going to be guided by, not humans, but AI and figuring out how you split up these different processes.
Interesting. Uh, and okay, and then related to that, you'd mentioned this before about how you got interested in this. What is a neutral atom?
Yeah. Well, I like to think a neutral atom is pretty normal, and everything else is weird. So a
Okay.
neutral atom is just a pure sample, a single atom of some kind of element. And we happen to use ytterbium. We have happened to use strontium in the past. We've done a lot of things. People have used rubidium and potassium and cesium and all these other things. But what it really is you create an environment, which for us is just a box, like a sealed box with windows that you have added a vacuum pump to, and you've pumped out everything in that box, and you figure out a way to introduce just a tiny bit of this element. And what we do then is we actually create optical traps, and there's been lots and lots of Nobel Prizes over the last like 30 years devoted to how you do this. But we create optical traps which trap, cool, and then allow you to manipulate individual atoms sitting inside of these optical traps. So what we do is we create these things called optical tweezers. And optical tweezers run, Arthur Ashkin won the Nobel Prize in I don't remember which year. He won the Nobel Prize for the creation of the optical tweezer. And again, the idea here is that it's just a very tightly focused laser beam, and the atoms like to sit at the point of highest intensity. And we do all these special tricks so that instead of capturing one, 100, 1,000, a million atoms inside the point of light, you actually create a trap that just holds a single atom. And with that single atom, it is a quantum mechanical object that you can then start playing with its internal electronic or nuclear structure and start assigning names that you refer to as qubit levels, and then you can
Okay.
start manipulating that information.
Okay. Um, so this is like, again, as a layperson, like if you more bits is better because you can have more combinations and that just gives
Yeah.
you, much deeper, richer information. And so what is it, what's kind of what's quantum doing that's jumping that up so many orders of magnitude?
Yeah, it's really the case that you can create correlations between different qubits in a way you can't with bits. And I think that is the key to how you can store so much information inside a handful of qubits. Like people talk about, writing down, all the potential quantum states you could have for like a 100 qubit system. And somehow if you gave every state like a bit of information, you would somehow have more bits of information than you have atoms in the universe and things like that. I
Yeah.
mean, all of that is because of this idea that the correlations between different qubits matter. And I think that is the richness of quantum computing, is that it's not just writing down, oh, here are the states of 100 different qubits, and I can write down all the potential states. It's that there's lots and lots of information about the correlations between those qubits. And
Yeah.
that allows you to have this, exponential takeoff in how much information you can store there and process in that computation.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Hopefully that gets across then to, I guess, what you're, and it goes back to what you were talking about, the phasing
Yeah, yeah,
between 0 and 1. So even you could, even if you could violate the laws of physics and go to like infinitely small scales and put as many bits as you wanted on something, it's really hard to compete with that phasing in terms of the number,
yeah,
I guess,
yeah,
of
exactly.
the computation. Okay. Okay. That makes sense. And that's really interesting. So it's a really powerful technology. And did you have a particular insight in terms of something that was like the secret sauce to start atom computing, or you said it was so you could do more with neutral atoms?
Yeah, I mean, I think we had some particular insight and we're lucky enough at the right time to go and start the company. I think now we have a lot of proprietary technology that we built to allow us to get to bigger and bigger and faster systems. But when we talk about starting the company in 2018, it was about seeing the opportunity. And honestly, it wasn't even the case that I went through it with, the complete intention to go and start a company. It was I went to it and said, this is a technology that people should be building quantum computers out of, having used this technology before, having learned about trapped ions, having learned about superconducting qubits, and saying, wow, neutral atoms are on the cusp of being able to do so, so, so much. And people are, not looking at all of the different new techniques that have arrived for this kind of modality and saying, well, if I combine this technique and this technique and this technique, I can go and solve all these amazing things. And so I think that I went to this thinking, God, I need to go find a national lab. I need to go find a big company. I need to go find a startup that's actually working on this. And it just didn't exist. And I think it was just because people hadn't put two and two together yet. And I mean, this was in 2017, 2018. You look at now, and there's tons and tons of neutral atom companies. There's big players like Google starting a neutral atom team. It's many, many years too late for that, I would argue, but
Uh-huh.
there's lots and lots of interest. And like you mentioned, we have this deep partnership with Microsoft. We have a new partnership with Cisco. I mean, people just didn't quite put two and two together at the right time. And I think that was the insight, is that this technology had a lot of legs. And I think that's got us, I would say, through the first 5 or 6 years. And now it's switched over to all the technology we've been building onto the side to make sure we get all the way to utility scale.
Okay. Okay. And clearly just the understanding of the technology and the technology itself is an enormous challenge and accomplishment to get done. But what about also just the just some basic parameters like people talk a lot about with scaling compute in general with data centers, so the concern is always energy and cooling.
Yeah.
Is that relevant to quantum computing?
It is. Luckily, our system operates at room temperature, so it doesn't use any power to
Really?
go to cryogenic temperatures. Um, Energy is important, but when we measure how much energy we're using right now, when we estimate how much energy we're going to use in the future, you will have utility scale systems that utilize somehow less power than like 2 or 3 racks of GPUs. So quantum computers made of neutral atoms are insanely, crazily energy efficient. And other technologies maybe not so, but it is really separates the connection between, I would say, energy usage and compute power.
Well, I mean, it's almost like what you described about the significance of the orders of magnitude difference in the compute power of quantum.
Mhm.
That's almost like a second thing that's almost as significant, that difference in energy use and cooling.
It is, and I think that the one caveat to that is there's always going to be tasks that classical computers are better at than quantum computers. Like I'm not going to pretend that everyone's going to switch to quantum computing in the end. Like there are
Yeah.
absolutely things that are way easier to do on classical computers than they will ever be on quantum computers. So I think for some calculations, it's going to be insane, the amount of savings and energy, but it's not true for everything.
Okay, that makes sense. And I think you were saying that in the beginning when you talked about kind of AI deciding kind
Yeah,
of which thing to use to do a certain calculation or certain
absolutely.
problem.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you choose your, it's a tool. It's a tool in the toolbox.
Yeah.
Very
And I think it's
powerful.
just it's the cool thing is it's a new tool. And I mean, I think that is, I would say, it's not an incremental change to tools we have. It is a fundamentally new tool. And I
Yeah.
think that I mean, AI that's good at math is going to help us get to how do you use these systems in more and more problems throughout industry and I think, or throughout government. And I think
Yeah.
this is going to be a huge multiplier of what you can calculate and what you can simulate.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so with your partnerships, is the idea the kind of what you're saying? Are they going to be looking to kind of slowly integrate what you're doing into the larger systems?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I mean, this is
Yeah.
something we've already been working on with Microsoft, and I'm sure that will continue on, and I'm sure we'll have future partnerships with others. I mean, integrating QPUs into HPC clusters and cloud computing is absolutely 100% on the roadmap. I think that's how people are eventually going to be consuming QPU usage. I would say right now, people are buying systems and kind of placing a huge premium on having these systems being built inside their country. And I think there's a lot of reasons why that's actually a good idea. I mean, I think that the ability to, house these systems gives them some kind of sovereignty over the data that goes through these systems. They can then control what they're planning to do with these systems, how they're learning how to build off these systems, and they can also become part of the kind of, global compute infrastructure as these systems need to get built more and more and distributed across the world. And I would say build expertise on both the applications and the just fundamental nature of how you build these systems and what are the pieces of the supply chain that actually get put into these systems.
Okay. Right. So it's there are end-to-end considerations then to make
Yeah,
this happen. Okay.
yeah,
And I mean that would relate to I mean the big news this week was $2 billion
yeah,
government
yeah.
investment, US government investment in the quantum industry. And so where do you think that came from? What is it strategic and geopolitical importance of this?
I mean, 100%. I mean, I can't speak for the US government. I can look at it in so we got one of these awards for $100 million. I can't speak for the US government, but I can kind of give my own opinion, which is that the US government wants to remain a powerhouse in quantum. They want quantum computers to be built in America and to be researched and designed and deployed in America. And they want to be a leader in this because it's a huge piece to a new kind of economy. And I think, AI is a piece of this as well. But quantum will be just another leg in the kind of stool of this economy. And they want to make sure that the US is taking a large part of that. There are other considerations, I would argue, which are probably kind of national security focused, which is not only do we just want to have an economic piece of this and make sure that they're supporting a nascent industry. They also probably want to eventually be first in line to make purchases of strategically relevant quantum computers.
Right. That makes sense. That makes sense. There's a huge dual use aspect to
Yeah.
this. Um, and is that primarily like crypto? Is that in security? Do you think that's the chief thing, or is there more?
I mean, I think security is a piece of it. I also think that there's just, a lot of hope that this can solve problems beyond just decryption. And like I talked about with chemistry and materials and things like that, there are gigantic, amazing problems that if we could solve for the US government would actually uh, help the US government enormously. And so one of the funny ones that I've heard of that I like to now bring up is this idea of materials that could, if we can create a material that could rust slightly slower, it turns out the US government has uh, a huge amount of pieces of equipment that they are constantly having to service and or change across the entire country and across all the military bases and everything like that that America owns. And so if they could have something that lasted just a little bit longer before these processes occurred,
Hmm.
it would actually save an astonishing amount of money. And so
Oh,
this is
interesting.
kind of an amazing, sequence of events where you could be like, well, what does materials research get you or get the average taxpayer? It gets them that, and it's not a small amount of money. Like the amount of upkeep that we spend per year is astonishing. And little bits and pieces of change can make huge impacts if measured on a year or 5 years or 10 years. These things can have huge, huge benefits.
Yeah, that's that makes sense. And it's interesting from a big picture perspective. I feel like we see this maybe, I don't know if it's a good analogy, but like in fusion, just for a long time it's scientific, it's in university labs and government projects, and then there just becomes this explosion where it's startup companies because you need to go to a different level where you need to think about supply chain, material science, just all these other aspects of it as opposed to studying the discipline. And I'm kind of hearing that from you. You didn't go decide to start a lab or something. You started a company to do this work with neutral atoms.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the base of what neutral atoms could do was already kind of understood, and it was certainly there have been amazing demonstrations in academia. But you have to go and build a working system that you can deploy and you can bring customers on. And that's something that's really, really hard in a university setting. And I don't want to say it's easy, but it's easier in an industry setting. And
Yes.
I think that you need to be able to create working machines and give them to customers.
Okay. And is that, I mean, is that effectively what I was going to kind of ask? What does atom computing do? And it sounds like, I don't want to say you fully understand neutral atoms, but it sounds like it's less learning more about neutral atoms and it's more about kind of execution and building this machine.
Yeah, when we spend, when we think about what are we spending money on right now, what are we spending effort and time and people on, it's all about building the technologies that let us get to bigger and bigger systems that operate faster and faster. So we have this thing that, we want to 10x the number of qubits every time we build a new generation of system. So we've had systems with 100 qubits, we've had systems with 1,000 qubits. Uh, we've said, we're going to build a system with 10,000 qubits, and then we want to build a system with 100,000 qubits. So what we do is all about building the technology that allows us to control and manipulate neutral atoms at that scale. And that is, I think, where we spend the vast majority of time and effort on, which is not necessarily discovering the intricacies of this, that, and the other thing with neutral atoms. It's actually spent how do you actually control, 10,000 atoms? How do you actually control 100,000 atoms and make sure
Okay.
that technology is ready to be installed in these systems according to the roadmap we've committed to?
Okay, that makes sense. And what is the product? Is there a way for kind of us to understand? Is this like a chip? Is it like a server? Is it, what kind of what would it be that you'd be providing a customer like Microsoft or a partner like Microsoft?
Yeah, so no, it's not a chip. So we're shipping off, or we have shipped off. Sorry, I said that wrong. We have shipped off most of the system to Denmark right now, and it's being assembled in Denmark. And in fact, I saw they had just posted images of the first pieces being assembled in their facility. So generally, it's a vacuum system, which it doesn't have to be that large. Right now, it's probably something like uh, a foot by 3 feet or something like that. So that's what you can do with off-the-shelf components. That could be made much, much smaller. But even if that's a small box that's say like 8 inches by 8 inches by 8 inches or something like that, what really ends up taking a lot of space is racks of lasers and racks of control electronics and things like that. So it's a few different 19-inch racks and then this vacuum system and some optics around that vacuum system. So I think as the systems kind of grow in complexity or grow in, I would say, complexity of what they can do, we'll actually be focusing more and more on shrinking and shrinking this down. But at the end of the day, I have to imagine each one of these kind of quantum computing modules is going to be, you know, a single 19-inch rack or two 19-inch racks or three 19-inch racks, something like that. And then
Yeah.
eventually, if you want many, many of these modules working together, you're going to link these up with fiber optics. And this is something we've also been working on with
Okay.
partners like Cisco. And we have a new partnership coming up as well as stuff we're doing in-house. But generally, it's going to be something you could place in a data center inside 19-inch racks.
Okay, I see. And And what are the components here? You mentioned how you have to make a vacuum,
Yeah.
and you were saying something about lasers. What are kind of the key features of a quantum system like yours using neutral atoms?
Yeah, so a very clean vacuum. For
Okay.
us, that's actually really an empty vacuum. Like a lot of other people put a lot of stuff in the vacuum. It's exactly the opposite here. We have a just an empty box with a
Yeah.
very tiny amount of the right atom in it, and then we have windows so that you can project light in. That's how we actually do this manipulation. Is we have microscope objectives that are looking inside this box, and you can make that box really tiny so that the microscope objectives are looking, practically speaking, at each other. And then it's projection equipment for creating images that you put into the back of those microscope objectives. A lot of that is, some of that is off the shelf right now, some of that's more proprietary, and in the future it'll probably be all proprietary to Atom. Um, but then in addition to that, we need light sources like lasers to go and give us really, really clean control of the
Okay.
electronic or the nuclear states of that atom. Most of that is, able to be bought semi off the shelf now, and so now it's going to be about industrializing that, getting that to be in smaller and smaller packages in photonic integrated circuits, so that you can use even less and less space for these things.
Okay.
And then just a bunch of control electronics, whether that's GPUs or FPGAs. It's how you actually control those projection equipment systems.
Okay. What was the second one? You said GPUs, or what's that second acronym?
FPGAs. So we currently use a lot of FPGAs, but we're also using GPUs and things like that.
Okay. Uh, that's cool. And I guess then, as the roadmap that you just mentioned, I think you've talked a lot about scaling the number of qubits. That makes a lot of sense. And then what comes after that? I kind of read things that seem to be coherence, fault tolerance, things like this.
I would say there's a lot that comes after it, but at the same time, what we've been doing is kind of a two-pronged approach, and this will continue. I mean, throughout the summer, throughout the years, we have been nonstop in showing how we can build quantum computers with the technology we have. And every system we're putting out, we're always going to put out amazing demonstrations, and we'll have even more amazing demonstrations this summer of how those qubits work together as logical qubits, what you can do with logical qubits, and all these things. And the
Yeah.
complexity of those demonstrations just going to keep increasing as the system increases in size. But that doesn't mean you should stop trying to build bigger and bigger systems. And that's why we do 10x every system, is that if you want to build a utility scale quantum computer, something that's actually useful, you can't just sit with a small number of qubits and just, hope and pray that someone comes up with an algorithm. We know what it takes to run these algorithms, and even every single person knows what it takes to run these algorithms in the industry. And you have to build bigger systems, and you have to make sure you're on a path to build a utility scale system. So for us, it's about dual tracking the demonstrations we can do today, the technology that's driving for bigger and bigger systems, and making sure you're building those bigger systems. So you're not just waiting around until A or B is ready, that you are
Yeah.
making sure that you are going to deliver a utility scale system to customers on time.
Okay. That's cool. It's this parallel process of the sounds like kind of the prototype development, but
Yeah,
also building these things for delivery.
yeah.
Okay. Um, Interesting. And so where is Atom Computing at now in terms of deliverable products or prototypes? And then where do you see, what's Atom Computing in, I don't know what the right year is to mark, 2030 or 2035? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, a lot's going to happen in the next few years. So, Atom Computing is on its second generation of system. We have two of those in-house. We are deploying one, or actually, we're deploying multiple more of those, including one to a customer site right now. We are working on our third generation system. We're working on technology for our fourth generation and fifth generation system now. Uh, 2030 is going to come around, and we are going to be demonstrating technology for our fifth generation system. We'll have deployed a third generation and a fourth generation system. There is a lot that is happening to bring to customers working logical qubits at very, very good error rates. And I think, like I said, over the next months or even years, you will see huge demonstrations of how quantum error correction can work with neutral atoms from atom computing. And you'll also see this steady drumbeat to make sure that in 2030 we have delivered multiple generations of systems to multiple customers and that we are well on track to be integrated into HPC clusters with utility scale systems.
Okay. Interesting. And when you mentioned, say, before 2030, you'll have your third and fourth generation deployed. You'll be working on your fifth. What does that look like? Does Microsoft have to do a lot on their end to be able to receive a system like this or integrate it?
So what we work with Microsoft mostly on is they have some really amazing tech talent for how you're going to utilize end user interactions in AI, how you're going to use different kinds of quantum error correction. We have our own quantum error correction team that's working on our own codes, but they also have great codes and great quantum error correction folks there. So they're figuring out, how do you control these systems at scale and how do you set up the architecture to give you exactly what you want. I think that, there's going to be a lot of differentiation, whether you use, Atom Computing's architecture, whether you use Atom Computing's hardware with Microsoft's architecture. I'm sure there'll be other players that enter into this kind of like quantum error correction architecture compilation layer as well. I think that they just have an amazing ability to, uh, have the resources to go and plan for exactly how they're going to do these things. And I'm sure there's also going to be startups and other companies, big tech companies in that layer as well.
Okay. And what does scaling look like as you go from these kind of first demonstration units to uh, like when you have to want to scale EVs, you had this kind of battery minerals, lithium or whatever. When
Mhm.
you talked about scaling the nuclear industry, it was like, uranium enrichment. Are there elements of quantum computing that will become bottlenecks as you try and scale?
I mean, I think we want to make sure that there's a heavy emphasis, especially in 2028, 2029, on design for manufacturing and making sure that these systems just don't require a lot of human intervention to manufacture.
Okay.
But I generally think there is not a lot of bottlenecks in this technology. I mean, certainly there's always going to be key pieces of technology that we have to figure out how to manufacture at scale, but at the same time, right now it almost feels like people, time, and effort is the bottleneck. And so I think
Hmm.
that was going to be aggressively worked on by Atom Computing to make sure people aren't the bottleneck anymore in future generations of systems.
Right. That's kind of a cool answer because a lot of times you hear about some kind of bottleneck, like I mentioned those examples, and it sounds like kind of the bottleneck is what you're working on. It's like, can you build the qubits?
Yeah,
Am I hearing
yeah.
that right? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of pieces right now are built and designed and then built by humans, whether that's, with contract manufacturers or at Atom Computing itself. Like I said, I think that assembly and things like that, if you can get better and better at kind of simplifying and miniaturizing the system, you can try to move more and more of that to being built by, pick and place machines or other things like that that would allow you to go faster and assemble more and more of these systems quicker.
Okay. Okay. Um, well, that's very cool. It's a really it's an exciting topic and an exciting area that I kind of feel that the same kind of feeling like in maybe like 2023 there was this spark where you could just tell that interest in nuclear fission was coming. I mean, that's an old technology. It's not like what
Yeah.
you're doing, but it was like this was going to reawaken. And, and then in the few years that followed, it's gotten really big quickly. And it almost feels like that's beginning to happen right now with quantum.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the amazing demonstrations, and like I said, they're going to continue. The rate of complexity and size of the demonstrations with quantum computing is going to accelerate. There's just no question, and people are going to get
Yeah.
more and more excited as these things get closer and closer to commercial reality.
Okay. And how much connection is there between what you're doing, quantum compute? I think, or you talked about your original work with atomic clocks, and so I've kind of heard that the three big things, there's quantum communications, there's quantum as it applies to PNT or GPS,
Yeah, yeah.
and then there's what you're doing, the compute. Are
Mhm.
they, is there a lot of relationship between them, or are they very fundamentally different things? Or
Um, there's a lot of techniques that are shared, but I will say there are. there are really different challenges that I think actually, push folks to have very different focuses on execution. that I think do kind of separate these things and kind of push one away from the other. I think
Mm,
eventually you could imagine that they're back to being more related than anything else. But right now, I mean, when you talk about quantum sensing, for example, what you're trying to do is you're trying to replace a sensor that already exists with something that performs that same sensing function uh, better or cheaper. Like that is the goal. It's not try to create, one special purpose thing that is, amazing and state of the art and is, a unique and beautiful snowflake that you would then try and say, God, now I want to create 100 this year, and then I want to create 1,000 next year. That's
hmm
actually not what quantum sensing is trying to do. Quantum sensing is trying to replace sensors that already exist, and those have a cost, those have a performance, and you need to beat those two metrics, either in some combination or some relationship
hmm
with each other. And also, it's not good enough to make 100 of them like that. Like for the most part, you're going to compete against sensors where people are shipping tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of units of these things.
Yeah.
And so it's a fundamentally different mindset. Because again, you don't have to do necessarily 10x better or 100x better, 1,000x better, or 10,000x better. For all you know, you could just have something that is 3x better and costs the same, and you have won. Or maybe it has to be 10x better, but it has to, only increase in price by a factor of two. It's just a very, very different kind of industry to have to go after. And I
hmm
think that right now, quantum computing is all about doing a step change. So actually having something that doesn't exist and then producing something that doesn't exist. Whereas quantum sensing, again, it's this incremental change over technologies that already exist.
Yeah, it's not that like you were talking about in the very beginning, just that you're almost in a fundamentally different enabling technology with what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I
Yeah.
skipped over quantum communication. Sorry, quantum
Yeah.
communication's a little different because it tries to straddle both. Because there is quantum networking and communication, which we work on with partners or internal, which is all about how do you connect multiple small quantum computers to
Yeah.
effectively create a large quantum computer, and that is really akin to quantum computing itself. Then there's this other form of quantum communication, which is how do you use the properties of quantum mechanics to create even more secure links that allow you to understand if people are quote unquote, listening into a channel. And so that
Okay.
that is that's a bit different. And I think I have less experience with that. I mean, my general understanding though is that you can build quantum secure networks, and I think that there's also post-quantum cryptography and things like that. So it really depends on what exactly is the use case that you're trying to replace with normal classical networks. And for
Mm.
some networks, that might actually be worthwhile, like having a quantum secure network link. But for others, it's maybe overkill. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So two different aspects of quantum communications. There's the networking one, which has some aspects that are similar to what you're doing with compute, and then there's just the
Yeah.
secure comms part that's really its own thing. And kind of like you were saying before about the timing, which is it's an incremental improvement. I mean, even though it's dramatically more secure, but it's
Yeah.
still within that category as opposed to almost like a new kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's really cool. This is an incredibly interesting topic and an incredibly interesting work and company that you're building.
Oh, thanks.
Is there anything that you kind of want to communicate to people or that we haven't kind of covered and you'd like to get across?
I mean, I think the one thing is that it is shocking how quickly quantum computing is coming. I think for a very long time it was in the future and in the future and in the future, and more is getting done at a faster and faster and faster pace.
Hmm
And quantum computing will be here in a shockingly small amount of time. And I think that is what I would say has changed over the last 12 months is that kind of like incredible turning point of demonstrations and ability to build these complex systems and so on.
Okay. Yeah. Do you think so Moore's law is beginning to maybe reach its physical limits just due to the size of, small
Mhm.
physics and the very small. is there a new law for as quantum scales? Is there a Bloom's law? Is there something?
Um, I don't know. I mean, I think that's going to depend a lot on the technology. I mean, I think that, as you get to a point of scaling, there's always going to be, I don't think there's one bottleneck. Let me put it like that. I think that a quantum computer is an integration of many, many complex pieces. And it's not as easy to say that there was one thing like the wavelength of light of the lithography that really sets, some kind of scaling law that, you increase, or sorry, you decrease that wavelength and all of a sudden things get better and better and better. Um, so I think that it's harder to predict exactly how different technologies are going to scale. Um, but I do think that there's a lot that you can do with technology we have now and technology that we're building now. And I think you'll see a huge explosion in the size of quantum computers over the next few years. And I think that that's great. I just don't know if it follows an exact 2x or 10x after that or how exactly it does it.
Okay, okay. Well, then maybe more practically, kind of go, it's a little bit more of an expansion on what I asked you about before about what does atom computing look like in 2030 or 2035? How about just in general, we live in a world that has quantum computing integrated into our systems.
Yeah.
Now, what do things look like?
I mean, I think it really creates a new tool for people to engineer materials and engineer chemistry and things like that. And I think fundamentally, a consumer is not going to be the one who does those things. It's going to be
No.
businesses and large corporations and governments and things like that. But I think that tool is going to really, really quickly permeate as a new way of doing development of technology and doing development of both high technology and low technology, like I was saying with those materials that might be able to rust less or something like that.
Yeah.
Like I think it's going to be a fundamental shift in how we go about kind of designing these materials and building these chemistry assays and things like that. I think that there's going to be a just new set of products that come out in the mid to late 2030s that are, designed and built, or sorry, designed first on quantum computers and built in a lab
Right.
or built in a fab. And I think that's going to be where consumers all of a sudden start seeing things being very different than they were before.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like yeah, like you were saying, it could be new drugs, it could be new high-end technology, but maybe, I don't know, maybe it is we have tools in our houses that don't rust or something,
Yeah.
simple. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
very cool. Well, Ben, this has been very interesting. Thank you for joining us today. I'm really excited to see your work as it progresses over the next few years and what atom computing does.
All right. All right. It was very nice meeting you.
It was nice to meet
All
you
right.
too. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.